Psalm 35. But first I want to read two other scriptures to you. If you found your way to Psalm 35, you don't need to turn to these, but the first is from the book of Ephesians. Paul says this, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might." Now that's a command. That's not a suggestion. You might be able to say it's an extremely strong suggestion. Be strong. The power of the Lord. Power of his might. God doesn't give us commands that we can't do. So that's something we can do. And if you are anything like me, you know, in looking at your own life, you know that you don't have the strength in yourself to live this life for the Lord. You know, there are some commands given by Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. How many have been successful in that, don't just not murder anybody, but don't be angry with anyone, because that's just as bad as murder. Don't just not commit adultery or fornication, but don't even look at someone and let those thoughts come into your mind. That's the level of perfection that God desires in us. If we want to follow him according to our own righteousness, okay, here's the standard, man. Perfection. Go for it. And so I read a verse like Ephesians 6:10 and I go, okay, I need to be strong in the Lord. I need to find my strength in the Lord. What does that mean? It sounds real great, doesn't it? Oh, be strong in the Lord. Well, how do you do that? How do you do that? I mean, if I'm going to be strong in my own self, I kind of know how to do that, though I will be unsuccessful in being perfect in that. I kind of know how to do that. I can go down in the basement every morning and start lifting weights and get physically strong. I can start studying and doing disciplinary things to my mind and just come out with, okay, this is how I'm going to live my life and I will be strong and good. I can do all that stuff, but how are you strong in the Lord? How do you find your strength in the Lord? Well, then there's Matthew 5:5, and Jesus says this, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." They're the ones that inherit the earth. Now, some jokingly say, well, after what we've done to it, who would want it? But we find in the Scriptures that there will actually be a new heaven and a new earth created. And it is the meek who inherit the earth or the land. Wow, the meek. Okay, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to be meek? Does it mean to just be real timid? Just let other people walk all over you? Whatever they say, okay, whatever you want. Yeah, I don't want to offend you. That would be being meek, right? Wrong. Jesus described himself as meek and lowly. Now read his biographies, and you will not find a man who was rolled over by people, who just went along with the crowd for whatever it took. No, he stood for righteousness to the point where he stretched his arms out on the cross. Wow, okay. I've heard meekness described as controlled strength. I like that. It's knowing where your strength is, but not just wielding it around to have your way, but being confident in the strength that you have, confident in the strength of the Lord. Okay, so we're supposed to be strong in the power of his might, and somehow the meek come into this. Meekness comes into this, being strong. Okay, I'm going to be strong. I'm going to be meek. No, I'm going to be strong. No, I'm going to be meek. Okay, they're somehow connected. How does this have anything to do with Psalm 35? Well, actually, it has more to do with Psalm 37. But we were going to get to Psalm 37 through Psalm 35 and 36 because they provide something of a nice introduction to what Psalm 37 has to say to us. Now, Psalm 35 speaks about something that you and I will face, and here's where the biggest test in my mind is in finding our strength in the Lord rather than doing it our own way. And that is when we face unfair persecution. Unfair persecution. Now, by definition, I think for the persecutee, persecution is always unfair. It wouldn't be persecution. Otherwise, it would be judgment. Right? But when you are the subject of being persecuted, it's never seeming fair. This is not fair. And in Psalm 35, David faces that. He faces that. Look at verse 7 of Psalm 35. He says, without cause they have hidden their net for me in a pit, which they have dug without cause for my life. Now, up to this point, he's basically been saying, Lord, fight against those who are fighting against me. Put them to shame. Let their way be slippery. Let them be ashamed of what's going on. Why? And he comes down to verse 7. Because without cause, they've hidden their net for me in a pit, which they've dug without cause for my life. Remember in the old cartoons or in the old movies where if they wanted to catch somebody, they'd dig a hole and then cover it with like palm branches and stuff like that and stand on one side of the pit and go, nya, 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 nya. And then a person runs through and whoop, they fall down into the pit. Well, that's actually the way they would capture wild beasts and so forth in that day, or the way that they would capture enemies. Do you remember they threw Joseph in the pit? Do you remember that? There was a pit conveniently there to throw him in. And here there's David saying, look, they not only dug a pit for me, they put a net in there to snare me in the pit so that I am kept there. And they did it without cause because I did not deal with them that way. It's not the way I treated them. Look at verse 11. This is what he said. He says, fierce witnesses rise up. They ask me things I do not know. They reward me evil for good, to the sorrow of my soul. But as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. In other words, he fasted and mourned for them when they were sick. I humbled myself with fasting, and my prayer would return to my own heart. I paced about as though they were my friend or brother. I bowed down heavily as one who mourns for his mother. But in my adversity, they rejoiced and gathered together. Attackers gathered against me, and I didn't know it. They tore at me and did not cease. With ungodly mockers at feast, they gnashed at me with their teeth. Hey, these people are rejoicing in my calamity while I am praying and fasting and worrying and caring about their sickness. Jesus said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's a radical concept, isn't it? Because we have turned that into do unto others as they have done unto you. Right? Give them back what they gave you. I want them to feel like I felt in this situation. We're dealing right now with the imminent death of my mom. And there's one family member who is bitter about some things that have gone on. And we are praying for that family member because they are staying away from my mom. And it's an extended family member, not one of the immediate kids. But it's sad. But I know exactly what they are going through because they felt persecuted and done wrong. And they want my mom to feel what they felt. We turn it into do unto others as you think they would do unto you. Maybe they wouldn't even do that. Let them be ashamed, is what David says in verse 26. Throughout this psalm, he's really not asking for, a stone to fall on their head or something like that. But in verse 26, he says, let them be ashamed and brought to mutual confusion who rejoice at my hurt. Let them be clothed with shame and dishonor who exalt themselves against me. Let them understand and be ashamed for the way they are treating me, for the way that they are behaving in this situation.